Welcome to the start of a new week here on the Morning Pitt right on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. Glad to hang out with you this morning as we get started on a new week. It's Monday morning. It's the, after a game day weekend. And more importantly, heading into the start of the ACC schedule. We're going to have a lot to talk about this week regarding Pitt's dive into conference play coming up this Saturday. We do these videos every day, Monday through Friday, these Morning Pitt videos right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And so, of course, we're going to have a lot of time to talk about Georgia Tech, to talk about the rest of the ACC, to talk about the Coastal Division. Georgia Tech is definitely a mess right now, coming in with a brand new head coach after Jeff Collins fired. That's going to be a real interesting sight to see in a game that I think Pitt was already going to be expected to win. Now, you would say that should be in a... it would be a disaster to lose that game. But we'll talk about that throughout the week. We have a lot to discuss as it relates to the Coastal Division and the ACC and Georgia Tech and Pitt's prospects diving in here with conference play. But we got to wrap up the weekend first, though. And we have to start with looking back. I think we do this every Monday morning. We look back at the last game, talk about what happened there, what we learned out of that game, and then, of course, go around the country, look at the national rankings, where Pitt checks in. And we do that all here on our Morning Pitt videos, which we release Monday through Friday on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. This is still kind of a new feature. We've been doing it for about a month. If you're worried that you're going to miss one of these videos or forget that we release them or you're not sure what time they come out, click that subscribe button and then turn on notifications so you get an alert right there on your phone every time we release a new Morning Pitt video. And more than just that, you'll get an alert or a notification anytime we go live. So when we do our live Panther-Lair show every Wednesday night at 8:30, or we go live for our post-game show after the game. This past weekend they played a noon game against Rhode Island, and we didn't start the live post-game show until about 8:30 because I had some other things I had to get to. You never know what time those things are going to start. This Georgia Tech game is an 8 o'clock game. We might not start the post-game show until like 1 or 1:30 in the morning. We're going to do it. I just don't know what time it'll start. If you turn on notifications, if you subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and turn on the notifications, you'll get an alert whenever we go live, so you'll never miss it. So make sure you do that. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And of course, like this video. We appreciate that very much. And as we get started here, a lot of the thoughts are the same thoughts that we had on the post-game show on Saturday night in the aftermath of Pitt's 45-24 win over Rhode Island, closing out the non-conference schedule at 3-1 and heading into the ACC schedule with, I'd say, looking like, I think you would say the best team in the Coastal. I don't really know, what's the competition at this point. Miami gets crushed by, I shouldn't say crushed, but for all intents and purposes, you got beat pretty bad by Middle Tennessee. And you just look around the Coastal Division, and we'll go around the Coastal tomorrow, so I don't want to dive too deep on this right now. But I think you make a pretty good case, and I think most people would probably say Pitt's probably the best team in the division right now. And maybe that was the expectation heading into the season. Miami got those preseason votes, but I think it's hard to argue with that contention at this point. And maybe that's a reflection of Pitt. Maybe it's a reflection on the rest of the teams because this division does not look very strong. But where do we stand with Pitt? What do we think about Pitt coming out of September, coming out of the non-conference schedule, and heading into really the meat of the 2022 season? And I think whatever we want to talk about and wherever we want to go with the conversation, I think inevitably it's going to be about the offense. There are plenty of things to talk about with the defense. There are plenty of questions to raise there. There are certainly injury issues that have been a problem. And we'll talk about that stuff throughout the week. There's no question about it. But the offense, though, this remains the biggest question mark. And not necessarily because they've been bad, although I think they've been averaging 27 points per game or something like that. And so I think you need to be above 30 in your average scoring. I think that needs to be your target and where you end up. It's not so much that the offense has been bad. I think the problem that a lot of people have with the offense, or maybe the reason that a lot of people feel uneasy with Pitt's offense right now, despite the 3-1 record, despite Izzy Abanikanda rattling off 3 100-yard rushing games, and scoring 4 touchdowns against Rhode Island and, standing as the ACC's leading rusher and all of that, I think the problem that most people have with the offense, and it's something I wrestle with myself, is we don't know what it is. We don't know what this offense is right now. For, to put into sort of terms that everybody likes to say it, we don't know what this offense's identity is. We don't know what the foundation of this offense is. And I think there are a number of reasons for it. I don't think it's a matter of they try a bunch of things and they keep failing at everything, and they haven't shown themselves to be good at anything just yet. I think you could maybe make a case in that regard, but I don't think that's the reason that we're struggling to figure out this offense's identity. I think the reason we have trouble with it, the reason I have trouble with it at least, of figuring out who this offense is, what the foundation of this offense is, and what the identity of this offense is, the reason I have trouble with it is because it has been considerably different in each of the 4 games this season. The approach has been very different each of the 4 games, and not necessarily because I think Frank Cignetti and Pat Narduzzi want to try out a bunch of things or show a lot of different things or hide this or hide that or show this or show that. I don't even necessarily think it's a product of just trying to take what the defense is giving you, which I'm sure when I asked Pat Narduzzi basically this very question at his noon press conference today about what the identity of the offense is, I'm sure he'll say something along those lines of, well, we're just trying to take what the defense gives us. I don't think it's that. I don't think the variations in this offense are a result of just schematic plans and game planning and those sort of objectives. I think it's a matter of, really personnel, and very specifically the quarterback situation, the quarterback position. And the changes from week to week, where you've played 4 games, but you didn't have your starting quarterback for 1.5 of those games. And in that full game, you also didn't have your backup quarterback. So you went with a redshirt freshman playing in his first live football game in 3 years. In an oft-repeated narrative that I don't want to keep saying over and over again, but I think it's such an important part of the storyline here. The Western Michigan game was not Pitt's offense. That was not Frank Cignetti's plan for what Pitt's offense is going to look like this season. I'm fairly confident about that. Now, if they could go out and run the ball 50 times every game and win comfortably, they would do it. There's no question about it. I think most coaches in America would want to do that because you're going to eat a lot of clock, you're going to control the game, and you're probably going to win. You are going to win. I'd say if you can do that effectively, if you can execute that game plan effectively, you will win. But I think Frank Cignetti and Pat Narduzzi know well enough that they're not going to be able to go out and run the ball 50 times every game and win in that fashion, that they're going to have to throw, that the offense is going to have to be more multiple and be capable of doing more things, which is what Kedon Slovis said after the game on Saturday, that he thinks the offense is very multiple, that they can attack a lot of different ways. And I think that might be true. The problem is we haven't really seen this offense do it consistently and really establish itself as being great at any of the various ways they could be attacking. So, you look at the games and you just see these contrasts. Even in the games where Kedon Slovis played, if you want to compare the West Virginia game to the first half of the Tennessee game to this Rhode Island game. You know what? Let's set Rhode Island aside for a second. It's a different kind of game. It's a different kind of approach, a different kind of game plan. Let's just set that one aside. We'll come back to the Rhode Island game. But the West Virginia and Tennessee games, right? When Kedon Slovis was in the game, all right? You're talking about the entire West Virginia game and the first half of the Tennessee game. You have some stark contrasts in the approach, the style, and ultimately the results. The first half of the West Virginia game, Kedon Slovis attempted 8 passes. He also had 4 rushing attempts. So let's say that those 4 were all, he was sacked twice. Let's say, and sacks go as rushing attempts. So at least 2 of Kedon Slovis's 4 rushing attempts in the first half against West Virginia were pass plays. Because that's ultimately what we're talking about. We're talking about run plays and pass plays. When we talk about the design of the offense and the goals of the offense and the offensive philosophy and ultimately the identity, we're talking about the plays that are called. So if a sack counts as a run in the official stat sheet, we need to adjust for that. We need to, account for the fact that that was actually a pass play. Okay, so Kedon Slovis in the first half against West Virginia, 8 pass attempts, 2 sacks, so at least 2 more pass plays, and then he had 2 other rushing attempts. I'd have to go look at my notes and see if those were design runs or scrambles. Let's call them scrambles. is probably more likely than in a designed run. So you've got 4 rushing attempts that are ultimately pass plays. So 12 pass plays in the first half against West Virginia. In the second half, 19. 16 pass attempts and 3 quarterback runs. All right. That's a pretty significant difference. Now, 10-10 game at half. They have to battle back. They have to fight and I think they were trailing at various points in that game, right? They had to battle back and come back and win it. And so maybe that affected the game plan. But it is a different offensive approach in the second half compared to the first half. And, you saw it too. And we talked a lot about these numbers in the aftermath of the game, being under center a lot in the first half and then a lot more shotgun in the second half where Keaton Slovis seemed to be a little bit more comfortable, even if Pat Narduzzi sort of dismissed the notion. Well, then you go into the first half against Tennessee. Lots of shotgun, 24 pass attempts, and 4 quarterback runs. Let's call it 28 pass attempts or 28 passing plays called just in the first half against Tennessee. 28. Even if you want to just go on pass attempts, he attempted 24 passes in the first half against Tennessee. He attempted 8 passes in the first half against West Virginia. Stark contrast. It's a change, an adjustment, and maybe it's just what the defense is giving us. But I think you do need to attack what the defense is going to give you. That's basic stuff. But you also have to have an identity. And maybe in that second half of West Virginia and the first half of Tennessee, we saw something of the sort of true identity of this offense. It was still a rushing approach. They still ran the ball in the second half against West Virginia and the first half against Tennessee. They still ran the ball, but they were also throwing a lot. The pass was part of it. And when we do all that sort of adjusting and accommodating or adjusting and accounting and change the numbers around to move those quarterback runs and sacks into the pass play category, you end up between those first 2 games. All right, and I'm talking the entire West Virginia game, the entire Tennessee game, a run-pass split, and not percentage-wise, but of the total plays that were, as they were called, if you're going to put the quarterback sacks and runs into pass play category, 83 passes and 59 runs. That's a heavy tilt toward the pass. And maybe you wouldn't call it heavy because, what Mark Whipple did was a heavy imbalance toward the pass. And I would say this is more balanced than Whipple's offenses typically were. But for all the talk that this offense is just going to just run the ball and they're just going to ground and pound and it's a Stone Age offense. And we've seen all manner of criticism of this offense. The reality is, particularly after the first half against West Virginia, where they did try to grind the ball a lot. They ran the ball 19 times and had 8 pass attempts in the first half against West Virginia. The reality is, out of those 2 games, you got more than 80 passes in passing plays and less than 60 running plays. That's, if it's imbalanced at all, it's imbalanced in favor of the pass. And ultimately, I think it is, the efforts are being made to try to balance the offense while still understanding that they're going to have to throw the ball to win. So, okay. So let's come back to our idea of this, of the offensive identity. All right. You got this first half of West Virginia, second half of West Virginia. 2 different things, really. First half of Tennessee, kind of a continuation from the second half of West Virginia. Then Keaton Slovis gets hurt. And now you're with Nick Patty. And you're back under center a lot. And you're trying to run the ball a lot. You're doing something different because you have to change your quarterback. And that's going to change the game plan and change the approach. So, you've now got four halves played, right? First half West Virginia, second half West Virginia, first half Tennessee, second half Tennessee. And you've got 2 of those halves that are kind of look like they might have a connection, because if we're looking at these 4 games, we're looking at 8 halves, and we just want to find something of a plurality where we can say most of Pitt's primary offensive personnel were on the field. Most of the main players were out there, and they did something sort of consistently over the course of a half. And right now, when we look at those first 2 games, you've got the second half against West Virginia, the first half against Tennessee is the only thing that really stands out as being points when Keaton Slovis was there and they did sort of the same thing, seemingly did more or less, took a more or less consistent approach to the offense. Then you get to the Western Michigan game. You don't have Slovis. You don't have Nick Patty. You go with the redshirt freshman who hasn't played a game in 3 years. Are you shocked that they ended up with 50 runs and 14 passes? Officially 52 runs and 12 passes, but two of those runs were quarterback runs. So made 50 passes or 50 runs and 14 passes. Are you surprised by that? I'm not. When that was clear, as they started that game, it was pretty clear what the game plan was going to be. And if somehow Western Michigan had found a way to stop the run, Pitt would have thrown the ball more. And they were actually effective when they threw. Now, Yarnell was 9 of 12. He did a nice job. He did a decent job. But of course they were going to try and pound it out in that game. Of course they weren't going to try and air it out with a guy who was playing football for the first time in 3 years. And I think they took more chances as the game went on, and they saw how comfortable Yarnell could be on the field. But opening the game, yeah, you're going to hand it off a lot. And you're going to try and get as much as you can on the ground until Western Michigan shows that they can stop it. That wasn't a surprise. But it also wasn't a game that you can call, anything of an indicator of what this offense wants to be or is going to be. And then you get to this game against Rhode Island. Ultimately, let's see what the final stat ended up being. So they finished with officially 41 rushing attempts and 27 passes thrown. Of the 41 rushing attempts, Keaton Slovis had 1, and the team, kneel down, had 2. So that's 3 to come off. That's 38 rushing attempts and, 28 passing plays called. An imbalance in favor of the run. Still 28 pass plays called. Some of it's not a terrible number. I think if you look over that, whatever it is, if you look over the second half against West Virginia and the first half against Tennessee, you've got about 47 pass plays. So, that if you're counting that as sort of an equivalent of a game, if you want to consider the second half of West Virginia and the first half of Tennessee as sort of maybe what the typical game would look like for Pitt in terms of the passing game, you've got close to 50 pass attempts. That's probably more than Frank Signetti wants to throw it and more than Pat Narduzzi wants to throw it. But I don't think they want to throw it as sub 30. I think they probably want to be high 20s and probably into the 30s in terms of pass attempts in most games going forward. Now, if they have the opportunity to run, they're going to run. I don't think there's any question about it. And when we get into this Georgia Tech game at the end of the week, as we talk about that game, heading toward it, look, they gave up a ton of rushing yards against UCF, and Pitt is going to try and find out if they can do that too. And let's be honest, if they can, they should. But they also need to be able to attack through the air. And this is where I think the lack of an offensive identity so far has caused fans consternation because we haven't seen them actually be successful attacking through the air. We haven't seen them try to attack through the air and really be consistently successful with it. At least, some spots here in the second half against West Virginia, some spots here and there in the first half against Tennessee. And then this Rhode Island game where it would seem like you had an opportunity to attack, that you should be able to take advantage of an FCS team and go deep on them. They really didn't. I counted probably close to half of Keaton Slovis' pass attempts were behind the line of scrimmage. Keaton Slovis said they were taking away the deep stuff. I'm sorry, man, but I don't think FCS teams should be able to take away the deep stuff against you. I think you should still be able to make those plays and take those shots. Nevertheless, my point is this. As we come to the end of September, 4 games down, I don't think we really know what this offense is or have seen what this offense is. Even, I take that second half West Virginia, first half Tennessee stat and say, oh, they had 47 pass plays in those 4 quarters there. That's not their offense either. I don't think they want to have a 47 pass play day. I think they want something a little more balanced and with a little bit more effective running. But they also are not going to have 50 rushing attempts like they did against Western Michigan. The reality is somewhere in the middle. The balance is somewhere in the middle. And I think the goal is somewhere in the middle of those two kind of extremes. But we just haven't seen it yet. it hasn't really been put on display, despite the fact that they played 2 Power 5 teams to open the season. And some of that is the opponents. Some of that's the circumstances of being down 2 quarterbacks. A lot of it is just, I do think it's just sort of the situations that they found themselves in. But now they find themselves in a situation where they're heading into ACC play without any real consistent output from whatever their sort of foundation offensive identity is going to be. Maybe it changes every week. Maybe they can keep doing this sort of chameleon act and changing every week and being successful with whatever the defense gives them, and maybe they'll win a bunch of games doing that. Maybe. It would be atypical, and quite frankly, I don't think it's really what Frank Cignetti has done in the past. Sure, you adjust every week. I don't think you adjust quite that much. They need to settle in with Kedon Slovis, settle in with this offensive line, settle in with these receivers and these running backs and tight ends, whoever they have available, and build that foundation, build that identity, and establish it so that they are, they can get really good at it. Because I still think there's a lot of potential in this group. I will say, I think the receivers have just been okay thus far. I don't think those guys have really broken out the way I expected them to, the way I think a lot of people expected them to. I also don't know. I also don't think they've gotten the opportunity to do it consistently, the consistent opportunity to break out. If Kedon Slovis plays in the second half against Tennessee, maybe we're talking a little differently right now. If he also plays at Western Michigan, maybe we're having a different conversation. And maybe if they go through those 3 games with Slovis healthy and they get the passing game going and they're effective throwing downfield and they really are kind of clicking, then we take a game like Saturday against Rhode Island and sort of accept it a little bit better than we are. I think a lot of fans, and even myself, I think we were looking at that game on Saturday as an opportunity to really kind of open things up and get some rhythm and consistency and production out of the passing game. And that wasn't the case. And it seemed almost by design. And so you're left still sort of wondering who this offense is, what they're going to do, and how good they're going to be heading into the 8-game stretch of, like I said, real games, the crucial stretch. So we'll find out. I like a lot of players on this team. I think the offensive line is not going to be able to push around ACC opponents the way they did for the most part against Western Michigan and for the most part against Rhode Island. Maybe Georgia Tech is the exception, but they're going to run into some trouble, and they're going to need Kedon Slovis to make the plays. They're going to need Konate Mumfield and Bub Means to make the plays. And through 4 games, we haven't seen that really all that consistently. All right, the other thing, new AP poll, new coaches poll came out yesterday. Pitt is number 24 in both. For the AP, that is sort of standing pat. Pitt was number 24 last week. They slid to that spot after beating Western Michigan, dropped 1 spot from 23 to 24. Really, it was a matter of Texas A&M jumped them and pushed them down a spot. Pitt dropped out of the coaches poll last week after beating Western Michigan and climbed back in now at number 24. I thought there was a decent chance for Pitt to climb in the polls this week. Number 20, Florida lost. Number 21, Wake Forest lost. Number 22, Texas lost. And number 25, Miami, right behind Pitt, lost. Number 23, Texas A&M was the only one in that group of 20 to 25 other than Pitt that won. And so I thought there'd be a chance for Pitt to jump a few of those teams, Florida, Wake, and Texas. I thought they would have a chance to jump them. Florida and Texas did drop out of the top 25 in the AP poll. Wake Forest dropped just 1 spot from 21 to 22. It's kind of funny. Wake Forest lost in overtime to Clemson at home and dropped 1 spot in the AP poll. Pitt beat Western Michigan on the road with a 3rd-string quarterback and dropped 1 spot in the AP poll. It's like losing to Clemson at home in overtime is equal to beating Western Michigan on the road with your 3rd-string quarterback. Right? Okay. And like I say, I mean, a lot of the times these things are, particularly when you're playing Western Michigan or you're playing Rhode Island, a lot of these things are going to be determined by what happens around you more than what happens in your game. Unless you lose, then you'll take a big drop. It's hard, I think, particularly if you're a program like Pitt, somebody who started in the bottom half of the teens and, is now in the 20s, it's going to be hard to get a real bump out of beating FCS or Group of 5 opponents. You're going to need to rely on those teams around you. So when Texas A&M beat Miami last week or 2 weeks ago or whenever that was, it made sense that they jumped over Pitt. And then they jumped a lot after they beat Arkansas, who was number 10. So sort of similarly, I thought when Florida and Wake and Texas lost 2021 and 22, Pitt would jump, 1 or 2 spots. What I didn't really account for was Minnesota, who is now 4-0, would come into the top 25 at number 21 after they beat Michigan State on the road. And then Florida State beat Boston College, not that impressive. They're also 4-0, so they climbed into the polls at number 23. I didn't really account for that. So those 2 teams getting into the top 25, in addition to a couple schools like Oklahoma and Arkansas, who both made double-digit drops, it created sort of a log jam or a roadblock for Pitt to get up any higher above number 24. Now, the good thing is they didn't drop out. That would have been pretty silly. And the good thing is that now they can work on building. 8 ACC games, 8 Power 5 opponents, 4 on the road, 4 at home. You're going to have a lot of opportunities not only to make an impression because you're beating Power 5 teams, but you have a lot of opportunities here to keep winning and turn 3-1 into 4-1 or 5-1 or 6-1 and all that kind of thing. And as you continue to do that, you'll slowly climb. And as some of the teams around you in the lower teens and the 20s lose, and there'll be losses in that group, of course, you're going to have chances to move up. Interestingly enough, Pitt now has been ranked in 11 consecutive Associated Press polls. That's the longest streak of consecutive AP polls featuring Pitt since 2002-2003. I think they entered the AP poll in November of 2002 and stayed ranked for 14 consecutive polls until October of 2003. So you got a little something going on there. They've been pretty consistently ranked dating back to last season, last November, I think it was. So, and they should not really run into a situation that drops them out of the polls anytime soon, because they should be able to keep winning. But they're going to have to figure the offense out. They're going to have to find that identity. So that's going to be something we'll be watching for sure over the next 8 games. Certainly something we'll be talking about a lot this week, I'm sure, on the Wednesday night Panther-Lair show. We're going to have a lot to talk about there. That's at 8:30 right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Every Wednesday night we go live for a live show. It's a live Pitt talk show, and I talk for a little while, and then you get in the chat screen there on the side of the screen, and you post your comment or your question, and we respond to it. It's fun. There's back and forth. It's like a little bit of a conversation. It's like a call-in show, an old-style talk show. There's no phones. You just type your message, and I read it and respond to it. Of course, we'll have the Panther-Lair post-game after Saturday night's game against Georgia Tech. I suspect it will be early Sunday morning when we go live for that, but we will do it. We did it after the Backyard Brawl. It went live at like 1:30 in the morning or something like that, and it was awesome. We had a lot of people. It was a lot of fun. We're going to do it after Georgia Tech too. And 8 o'clock game, we might not get live. We might not go live until 1:30. That's fine. We're going to do it, and we'll have a good time with it. So actually, who knows? That might even be 2 o'clock because I might not be leaving. That game might go 4 hours. And if that game goes 4 hours, we're still going to be sitting in the press box at midnight, or waiting on the post-game press conference at 12 or 12:30. So that's going to be a late one. But we'll be live. We'll be live for a post-game show right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you subscribe right down there. Turn on your notifications so you get an alert every time we go live. And make sure you stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Pat Narduzzi press conference today. New Two Deep will be out. We'll have lots of things to talk about tomorrow. We'll look around the Coastal Division as well. So make sure you tune in every morning and like this video as you watch it. Like these Morning Pitt videos as you watch it. I really appreciate those. So, have a great Monday. Hope you had a great weekend. We'll be back tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.